I'm minding my business, officer. I'm minding my business. Please just leave me alone. I told you the last time. Please just leave me alone. Please, don't touch me. Don't touch me, please.
Hold on.
Listen, don't touch me, please.
The girl came over,
not touch me.
gave us a bag of baby shit.
I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe.
Just take him down!
My neck hurts. Everything hurts. Mama.
Get up and get in the car right.
Back up and get on that step. Okay.
Get off of him now. What is wrong with y'all? What the f? He got made.
All he did was break up a fight.
He's stopping his breathing right there, bro.
I can't breathe.
Back it up.
Bro, he's not even moving. Get off of his neck, bro. No, bro, look at him. He's not responsive right now, bro.
Sir, CMS, come on. We're going to get a help, all right?
Back on the street.
Don't touch him.
Don't. You could at least lifted him up off the ground, bro. We wouldn't even trip, bro. Yeah, 987. You just killed that, bro. You just
Y'all
killed
just really
him, bro.
just killed that man.
Wow, that's a little rough to look at. That was Three Brothers, a short film from actor-director Spike Lee, who intercuts a pivotal scene from his iconic film Do the Right Thing with the real-life incidents of Eric Garner and George Floyd's deadly encounters with the police. We are on Facebook and Twitter with our post-show continuing our discussion, Standing for George Floyd, A Nation Protests. Phillip, I want to start with you because I cut you off a little bit because I wanted to close out the broadcast, but I did want you to finish, and then I have another question for you. So finish your thought. You had hope, you said.
Well, then hope and also tempered by what we just saw. That video of Spike Lee is so powerful. It always reminds us that these things are repetitive, and they're repetitive because of the institutionalized nature of racism in this country and police violence. Police violence that's basically, again, I use the term fortified because it's important, by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's own rulings have basically made it hard to prosecute police officers when they murder Black Americans, when they murder Black people, when they murder Latinx people, when they murder Native Americans. They are protected by law. And this is also why some attorneys general around the country this week, basically 18 of them, I understand, are basically got together and trying to force or convey to Congress the need to create legislation that basically changes or addresses the institutionalized nature of this injustice.
And Maura Healey, our Massachusetts Attorney General, had signed on to that. Will this kind of actionable item mean something, Phillip? I mean, this could have happened before, but it didn't. Is this a moment where you think there's an opportunity that something actually could concretely come out of this?
It's hard to know. I think that the bottom line is that as long as you have the Trump administration in place, let's be clear that the Trump administration will continue to give platitudes to the notion of justice in this country, so on and so forth. But it also has a Justice Department, a Department of Justice that basically its policies and its actions are in contravention to this notion of justice. And I think that a lot of change can only occur, we know this to be true, when people get out and vote. I'm not going to tell people how to vote, but certainly not as a reporter. But I think it's fairly clear that, for example, the police unions have been absolutely emboldened by the Trump administration, and for good reason. When you have, during the Obama administration, efforts to reform police departments, and the first thing that the Justice Department does under the Trump administration is obliterate those reformations, those reforms, those policies, then it's clear that there is no effort, in fact, to really change the culture and to change the institutionalized nature of racism.
All right. Kim, I am looking at some concrete actions that have been proposed by Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. She's put forth some legislation with Minnesota Representative Ilhan Omar, California Representatives Karen Bass and Barbara Lee. They want to improve oversight and independent investigations to hold individual law enforcement officers and departments accountable. And I should say, in Massachusetts, the Massachusetts Black and Latino Caucus has come together and offered up similar kinds of proposals. One is to create an independent special prosecutor at the state level. That's Representative Russell Holmes. And Representative Liz Miranda wants to get rid of chokeholds, or a policy that specifically says chokeholds have to go. So again, this is concrete stuff coming out of this. Do you see this moving in this direction, and do you take this as a positive first step, I guess? Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm not an expert, but I know there are people who are studying this. From my position, I'm not sure that the system can reform itself. I mean, part of the problem is there are 1,800 plus police departments in this country. That's problematic, first of all, right? So these nibbles, these bites and nibbles are important, barring chokeholds. Certainly barring warrior training, which is one of the biggest problems, right? The way that this warrior training has infiltrated police departments across the country over the past couple of decades. There are concrete steps we can take, but I'm looking into this defund police movement, and I'm not familiar with it enough to talk about it. But I do think that we have to that what's really needed is a much bigger overhaul of how police function in our society, how they are funded, and what their position is. These officers really believe that they are warriors, not peacekeepers, and that's a bigger problem than banning chokeholds. It's certainly a bigger problem than training. It's certainly a bigger problem than psychological screening of bad apples. It's not an individual problem, and it's not a training problem. It's a policing problem, and it's going to call for much, much bigger solutions, in my opinion.
So let's follow up, Michael, with Kim's point, because in L.A., Mayor Eric Garcetti has proposed cutting, well, he said he's going to do it, cut $100 to $150 million from the LAPD budget. Now, I understand their budget as is $1.8 million, and that money is to be reinvested into communities of color. I should also note that warrior training that Kim referenced, and the guy that Phillip referenced, Kroll, who is the police union chief in Minneapolis, was banned in Minneapolis, and then Kroll brought it back by hiring an outside firm to train the cops in warrior training. So there we are. So do you think that a step like the Garcetti and the other proposals can begin to do something?
These are steps in the right direction. We should also talk about what's happened in Minnesota, where Minneapolis public schools have severed their contract with the police department, so there will no longer be police officers in the public schools. The University of Minnesota has begun to scale back its contractual obligations with Minneapolis police. That's another step that we can take. So when we talk about defunding, we're not just talking about a 5 or 10% situation. We're talking about really hitting them where it hurts, where the contracts that provide most of their pay come from. Another dimension of this is, look, when police are held accountable in those rare instances by the Justice Department, taxpayers ultimately foot the bill. The accountability, right, comes from we end up paying the dollars that settle these cases. That money should come from police pensions, for example, so that they actually know that they are the ones paying for the wrongdoing. And with respect to the demilitarization of the police, this is a multi-level governmental problem. Militarization of the police was intentional. It happened in the late 20th century as a result of the policies of the Reagan administration, which essentially gave military equipment to local and state police departments if those local and state police departments arrested enough folks for drug offenses. This is the system that we have, where local and state departments were incentivized and rewarded with military equipment by the federal government. That relationship is patently absurd and violent, and it needs to end. Now, we don't have the power at the moment because of the federal government to do anything at the federal level, but each one of us needs to get involved at the local and the state level to the extent that we can.
And Renee, Elizabeth Hinton at Harvard is an expert in those policies as they were put into place originally in her book, From the War on Poverty. It's a long title, but she has documented how each of those policies came to be based on really nothing, just somebody's feeling in the moment. So the same question to you about these first steps. Do you see this moving in a direction that it can actually happen, I guess, first of all?
I mean, it seems like that kind of situation where everyone's kind of paying attention, so now you put these policies out there. But I think what happens time and time again is everyone waits for it to kind of go away, for something else to distract people so they could not do this kind of thing. You know, when you give police officers the tools of warriors, they think they're warriors. You know, if you raise them to be hammers, everything looks like a nail. And that's what we keep seeing time and time again. We saw that 6 years ago in Ferguson, and people were shocked by why Ferguson, Missouri had tanks and armaments and all of these things that, you know, we would have assumed that you would see in Fallujah or Afghanistan. So, you know, this has all kind of happened behind everyone's back, except now we see this all the time. There's no way you're going to put cops on the street in these uniforms with these tools and not have problems. So, yeah, I think it's good. I think it's what Michael says. You have to demilitarize the police, but there is such an incentive in this country to believe that's exactly what the police need to have, and inevitably, we're the ones who suffer that.
And let me follow up with
one other thing, if that's okay, Callie.
What?
Just add one other thing. I think the other bulwark against police abuse and violence, increasingly, but on a small scale at this point, are district attorneys, progressive district attorneys. Some around the country, like Rachel Rollins, for example, here in Boston, but others in Philadelphia and other places are basically telling police officers that, you are not going to essentially get away with murder. What just happened in Minnesota is very significant, where the case was taken away from the local district attorney and put in the hands of the, in this case, of a progressive state attorney,
Attorney General.
Yes,
Attorney General.
Keith Ellison. And this is significant. It's not to say, but he still has to rely on laws that are antiquated that still protect police officers disproportionately. But it's important to point out that the district attorney increasingly becomes an important bulwark against police violence because there's always been assumed that the district attorney and the police will walk and talk in the same way. And usually that is, in fact, the situation. But this is significant development, and it does make a difference, a DA, quite often.
Well, one of the things that's important to mention with Attorney General Keith Ellison is he made it clear that he was not rushing through the process because he had to follow those steps because of what the history is of police officers usually getting off. Now, we have a Facebook question. I'll start with you, Kim, which is, why does the killing of unarmed black men get more attention than black women?
Because women's lives don't matter as much as men's lives, just like black lives don't matter as much as white lives.
Okay.
That's it.
All right. Renee, you want to respond?
I mean, I agree. You know, you keep seeing all these things like the psychological impact that these sorts of killings have on black men. And they say is that they have no impact on black women. People talk about their black sons. They don't talk nearly as much about their black daughters. And we know from Breonna Taylor to Tatiana Jefferson that black women are getting killed by the police as well. So I agree with Kim. It's like there's just not enough tension on what happens to black women because people don't care about black women.
Michael?
I mean, I think that's right. I would just echo something that Renee said. So often when black women are involved in this conversation, they're involved as mothers, as if that's the only role they have a right to play in this movement, as if that's the only role they've played historically. And you just talked about Fannie Lou Hamer. These are the generals and the legends of this black liberation movement. Women have been at the forefront since the beginning, and they will continue to be.
Kim, you've already answered this question, but I'm moving to another question, Phillip. Just hold on.
All right, go ahead.
Should it be black people's responsibility to educate white people about how hard it is to be black in America? If you want to answer that, Phillip, go ahead.
Should it be
me?
No, I said, Kim, you've already answered it. So I'm moving to Phillip. If he would like to answer this question, should it be black people's?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Should absolutely not black people's responsibility. I mean, that onus is that's too heavy. and that's been on black folks for forever. I think that, and I think there's starting to be some realization that you cannot, and I don't, frankly, waste my time trying to educate folks who basically have their minds made up. But however, there's a caveat. If there are folks who are genuine, who are legitimate in their inquiry and about race and their role in perpetuating racism, I might engage in that discussion personally. As a people, I think black folks, I think it's not a question of responsibility, but I think it is important that we all take part in a societal discussion, not the conversation that we've been talking about for decades. I mean, we're past that. But I think it's important to take place in those discussions when, in fact, we can advance policies and enact policies and not simply, rely on the rhetorical fabric of these issues.
Kim, you want to add?
Yeah, just very quick. Just very, very quick. That's fine if Phillip wants to do that. My concerns are twofold. One, it continues the idea that this is an individual problem, and it is not an individual problem, right? It continues the idea that this is a black people's problem. It is not our problem. It is white America's problem. And the third thing is, I just referenced those people to Audre Lorde's great essay, "The Master's Tools Will Not Dismantle the Master's House," in which she said it is a primary tactic of the oppressor to keep the oppressed concerned with the feelings and the knowledge and the education of the oppressor, right? Every minute that I spend educating a white person who has all of the world's knowledge at your fingertips in Google, do a search, right, is a minute that I can't spend out there protecting my black daughter and my black son. So that's my position.
Renee.
Really quickly. A few days ago, I interviewed Joan Trumpara Mulholland, who was a freedom rider. She's a white woman from Virginia. She was a freedom rider. She was one of the people sitting at the lunch counter in this really iconic photo. And I talked to her son as well, who runs a foundation to educate people about racism. And what he said, and he is a white man, he said, racism is a white person problem that we always ask African Americans to solve for us. African Americans obviously have to deal with the effects of racism, but racism is a white disease. I say to people, look, if white people created white supremacy, which we did, we should be at the forefront of dismantling it.
Okay.
And that is my answer now to every white person who emails me and asks what they need to do. Look at your own house.
Michael, I'm going to get you to respond and say this because I know you also pay attention to pop culture. I imagine you saw Lizzo's piece on Instagram in which she said to black folks, it's not your responsibility to educate white people. White people, go to Google, which is what Kim said. Michael.
This is well established at this point. I think the other thing we have to pay attention to is just knowing about it is not changing it. Even if you could educate, even if every white person were fully educated about what's going on here, that education in itself is not going to be the undoing that we need in order to get something that even approaches a notion of justice in this country. So education is one thing, but even in that kind of scenario where white folks do educate themselves, they have to have the courage and the resolve to remake a terribly violent and unjust world.
One last question for all of you. What one thing would you like to see come out of this that might be a measurable first step of any sort, in any direction you wanted to have it go in? Just one thing. I'll start with you, Kim.
I don't know. I don't know. Donald Trump resign. That would be a start.
Okay. All right. Phillip?
I'd like to see laws changed. I think that offer impunity to police officers when they kill black folk and when they injure black folk or any people for that matter. When police should not be able to get away with murder, should not be able to get away with behavior that is antithetical to their so-called code. And I think that's going to take legislation. And it's going to take, and it may take a lot more than that in order for those things to happen.
All right, Michael.
Demilitarization and defunding of police.
And Renee.
Right now, I want the officers who murdered Breonna Taylor fired, arrested, and charged. That's what I want right now.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Obviously, this is a conversation, sadly, that we may likely have again, but I appreciate all of your insight and your wisdom in this very powerful moment. Thank you all so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.